When we think about Valentine's Day, we often think about romantic love. But it's really important that when we talk about love, we also talk about boundaries, especially when it comes to how we want to be treated by people that we care about. Today I'm going to share what I've learned about boundaries and what Doug and I have worked on as a couple. And I hope that it helps you because this is such a crucial topic for anyone. Growing up, my parents owned a grocery store, and it was all about how can we please everybody. My parents really abided by the rule that customers were always right. So most of the time, if they could, they said yes. And so I grew up thinking that if I said no to someone or set a boundary, that they would get mad at me or I would let them down. And that led me to be such a people pleaser. I loved making people happy and making people like me. But in doing so, I saw my life spinning out of control. I have also committed to way too many things because I did not know how to say no, and I constantly felt like I was letting people down. I also really used to struggle with confrontation, and so I put off having difficult conversation. And all of this led to stress and unhappiness, and it wasn't good for my mental health. An example of this is when my parents were going through their divorce. It was really affecting me because I felt caught in the middle. Something that really helped me in talking to my parents all those years ago was actually a book I had to read in college. I'll link it in the caption. It's called Boundaries: When to Say Yes, How to Say No to Take Control of Your Life by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. Reading this book was life-changing for me. After reading this book, I learned that I needed to set boundaries around what I wanted my parents to share with me about what was going on with their divorce. Our relationship became much healthier and stronger because of that boundary I set. This book has had a huge impact on pretty much every relationship I've ever had, family and friends. Doug and I also read this book together when we first got married because we wanted to make sure that our marriage remained the most important things in our lives after our faith, and we didn't want to let other relationships get in the way of having a healthy marriage. We needed to have some boundaries with others in our lives so that our marriage would start in the right direction. I've actually gone back and referenced this book many more times over the years because it has very good practical reminders about setting and keeping healthy boundaries. It is a Christian book, but I believe that it would benefit anyone looking to create healthy boundaries in their lives. But even though I've read this book multiple times, it's really easy to let these things slip by the wayside and forget about them. So this past fall, both Doug and I started noticing that we were not being good about holding to our boundaries. So we had to revisit parts of this book. So let's back up for a second. What is a healthy boundary? The Boundaries book defines boundaries like this. Having clear boundaries is essential to a healthy, balanced lifestyle. A boundary is a personal property line that marks those things for which we are responsible. In other words, boundaries define who we are and who we are not. Boundaries impact all of our lives. Physical boundaries help us determine who may touch us and under what circumstances. Mental boundaries give us the freedom to have our own thoughts and opinions. And emotional boundaries help us deal with our own emotions and disengage from the harmful, manipulative emotions of others. So boundaries are good things. We have boundaries all over our world. We have fences and laws and rules. And those are all boundaries so that we can all be safe and trust that others will abide by the rules. I mean, when you stop at a stoplight, you're trusting that others are going to abide by the same rules. But when it comes to relationships, boundaries are a lot trickier. So the book goes on to say, does your life feel like it's out of control? Perhaps you feel like you have to say yes to everyone's requests. Maybe you find yourself readily taking responsibility for others' feelings and problems. Or perhaps you focus so much on being loving and unselfish that you've forgotten your own limits and limitations. Or maybe it's all of the above. This is a good way to think about when it's time to set a boundary. Another way to think about a healthy boundary is when you firmly communicate your needs in a relationship. For example, you may have to tell a friend that you cannot talk to them after a certain time every night because you need sleep. Another example of a healthy boundary is communicating the fact that you have a right to change your mind. Just because you agreed to help someone with a task or go out on a date with someone doesn't mean that you can't change your mind. You can also set a boundary around whether or not you're going to get sucked into someone's conflict. Let's say your sibling is mad at your parent. You can agree to listen to your sibling, but you don't have to agree to take their side in the argument. Boundaries can also be physical, like if you don't want to be touched or hugged by a certain person. Another boundary is your right to have time alone. If you're in a close romantic relationship or friendship with a person, they might cross this boundary and expect you to spend all your time with them. It's healthy to have alone time, so that would be a boundary that you're setting. It's important to remember that you are only one person, and as much as you want to be everything to everyone, you just can't. I was reminded of this last year with a friend who was needing me a lot, and I wanted to help and be there for her. But I always felt like when I couldn't be there right when she needed me, or I needed to end the conversation after an hour and a half of being on the phone, she'd be angry with me. And so I realized that a friendship is supposed to go two ways. People have to be understanding in their friendships. I can understand when people can't talk in an exact moment. So I began to go back to these boundary lessons and realized that I needed to implement these principles in my life. In the Boundaries book, the authors also talk about how to recognize if you have unhealthy boundaries and what to do about it. They write, "You teach people how to treat you. You get to decide what you allow and what you don't allow." They also share that when you're going through this process, you're probably going to experience guilt, but that's totally normal. It's also normal for the other person to be initially upset. But the authors write the first thing you need to learn is that the person who is angry at you for setting the boundaries is the one with the problem. Another positive side effect is that by firmly communicating your boundaries, you will also teach the other person what they're allowed to have boundaries in their own lives too. I want you to remember that it's important to set healthy boundaries with our relationships for your own mental health and well-being. When we have relationships that are more draining than they are fulfilling, or if the other person tends to guilt trip you to do about things, those are two signs that you may need to set a boundary with that person. What's challenging is that oftentimes the people we need to set boundaries with are people that we either have to have in our lives like a family member, or we feel obligated to keep them in our lives like a friend that we've had for a long time. And as hard as it is, remember that setting the boundary is for the best. Every time I've had to set a boundary in my life, the relationship has gotten healthier and stronger. And you'll be so glad that you did. I've set boundaries before, and the other person ended up thanking me because my tough love ended up being just what they needed. Setting healthy boundaries will positively affect all parts of your life: school, work, family life, friendships, romantic relationships, and much more. It really comes down to respect and self-care. When you have healthy boundaries in your life, it really impacts your mental health in a positive way. Over the years, I've seen how healthy boundaries have really helped me have a more balanced life, and that it's okay to say no. If you struggle with any of these areas listed in this video, I really encourage you to read a book about boundaries, listen to a podcast about boundaries, or talk to a counselor about setting boundaries. It's important to learn how to love people in a healthy way. Love does not equal yes, and love does not equal I'll do everything you need me to do. We need a renewed vision of what love actually means. Be healthy and love yourself by setting boundaries. Thanks for joining me.